Hey, how you doing guys? It's Mikl the Pikl here. You might have noticed I've been gone for a long time, and in this video I'm going to explain why I've been gone for so long, explain what's happened, and I'll do this all while making some tomato sauce. Alright, this video is going to be largely unedited, but I'm just going to answer a bunch of questions that I've gotten recently. So if you have the time, please watch this whole video through. I might leave timestamps in the description if you want to skip to a particular part, that's alright. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is this new knife that I've gotten. So it's if I can get it out, a Bowie knife. I recently got it. It was about $170. So for the past couple of years, I've been carrying either a Leatherman multi-tool on me or this pocket knife that my friend gave me, and I find I use it constantly, just at work, because I have worked in welding shops for the past couple of years. It is used constantly, and it's very, very handy to have. But now that I work for myself, I can carry something a bit more attention grabbing because no one's gonna worry about it. So I got this nice Bowie knife, and it helps cutting down trees. If I get a splinter in my hand, I can take it out, lever, opening paint cans, making cuttings off of trees. It's great for everything. And now I have it on my hip. So in Australia, if you didn't know, the gun laws are very, very strict. So my personal belief is almost everyone should be able to concealed carry a pistol on them, but that's just a huge pain in Australia. It is very frustrating too, but it is easier to just carry a knife on you. Typically the word tool, as in I pack a tool, refers to a gun, but in my case it refers to a knife. So if I say I pack a tool now, that's what I'm talking about. So first step in cooking anything is to sharpen your knife. So this is the sharpening grinder that I made a couple months back. The video will be somewhere on the screen if you want to check it out. So, got my very, very makeshift setup of an overhead cam. It's just a tripod on my table. So, these are some fresh jalapenos from my garden, and I don't think it's traditional, but we're gonna put some in the sauce anyway. So, I'll get started talking about what's been happening. So, in the past couple of years, I've been working in welding shops, both doing work experience and a full-time apprenticeship. About a year ago now, at the start of the year, it's hard to talk and cut at the same time, I got my apprenticeship, and I was very excited about it. It was an engineering apprenticeship, so I got to work in a structural steel shop where they made things like warehouses and stuff. So that was high amperage MIG welding, and that's pretty much it on things like I-beams most of the time. After about 6 months of working there, I ended up getting fired because the management really didn't like me, because the place was extremely unsafe and I complained about it. For instance, they'd have people wire brushing with an angle grinder the rust off the beams right next to where everyone was welding, so we'd just be sucking this iron oxide into our lungs for the whole day. On top of this, towards the end of me leaving there, on one of the overhead cranes, a motor off the side of it fell from maybe about 10 meters height and smashed on the floor right next to a guy, almost killing him. They proceeded to lie to the workplace health and safety about what actually happened just to try and save themselves. Yeah, it's very frustrating. So I never really enjoyed working there, and I even went as far as comparing it to prison. It was absolutely terrible. I got paid next to nothing for working extremely hard, so it was a blessing in disguise that I left. Anyway, a couple months of just being on my own, I got hired for a second apprenticeship at a much, much larger company. I can't say what it is or what we did there, but it was still welding, just on automotive things, but very, very heavy steel parts. So it was a much nicer place, and everyone was very nice. It wasn't even close to like the last place, or at least that's what it seemed like. It was much better conditions, they had much better policies and was much more legit. They were an actual welding place and followed codes instead of just throwing stuff together, which was what I really appreciated. And they were absolutely maniacs about safety. And that can get annoying, but at least if something goes wrong, it's not really my fault, because I can fall back on the company. Anyway, I was working at that place for, I think, about 2 or 3 months when I was on a brake press. And after about maybe 3 weeks of spending 8-hour days on it, so 40-hour weeks, I started developing golfer's elbow just from pressing thousands of the parts a day, which were very heavy, and I had to do it all manually. Then this sort of created a huge kerfuffle, and eventually the company let me go, and instead of trying to actually just tell me what happened and why, the truth, which is why they just didn't want to deal with my injury, they made up an excuse and gave me an infringement for something I didn't do. So I left. But anyway, I'm glad, because it was getting very stressful and I was just doing these scum of the earth jobs on light duty for months. So I'm glad I left. Anyway, me getting fired from there has kind of made me lose my interest in welding. And I know most of you guys know me for welding. I started welding when I was 14, and I just straight out of the gate, I was obsessed with it. And I taught myself, and then I spent, I think, over a year just doing work experience for places. I've worked welding in the hundreds of amps ranges on several things. I've worked in fabrication on trailers, and then the structural steel, and the my most recent job. And so I have about 3 years of welding on my belt, and it comes to me naturally. And I've worked in workshops for a very long time, and even before I started welding, I was a woodworker, and I've always been very naturally skilled. So it was sort of a no-brainer for me to get into it, but some things just don't work out, and there's better plans that God has for us. So next ingredient is some celery. I'll get to chopping this up. So back to my employment and things like that. If you didn't know, I have both ADHD and Asperger's, which is also known as high-functioning autism. It's a part of the autism spectrum, where the reason it's called high-functioning autism is not because the autism's high-functioning, but because the person with the autism is highly functioning, or at least is supposed to. It's kind of like a high-functioning alcoholic. They still can get things done even though they have a serious problem. That's what it means. So with these conditions, it's made me excel at certain things. I did very, very well in school because I'm pretty smart. It's made employment very, very tough. Not necessarily all because of me, it's just people don't really understand me and can get confused with things I do, even though I know why I'm doing them and there's a completely legitimate reason behind them. Often people will see that as I don't know what I'm doing, and it's very frustrating. So I've always despised anyone in authority, and that's caused some real problems. And like I said, it's caused me to lose 2 jobs now. Let's give this celery a little wash. So let's get the celery all chopped up. So now that 2 places have fallen through, and I've realized sort of how at least the starting out welding world is, and for where I am, it's not really what I thought it was. Just sitting, wearing a bucket on your head for 10 hours in the blistering heat, breathing in smoke, and getting paid almost nothing for it for the next 5 or so years. I don't think I can handle it. So it's really made me rethink what I'm doing. So what I'm doing currently is I'm trying to start a nursery of plants, that is. So my main crops will be sort of things that are a little harder to find, but that are still not rare enough that people know what they are. Chilies will be one of my main, or peppers, which is a more proper term, will be my main thing to sell, and I'll sell the plants of them. I think I've got about 50 varieties of peppers, or even more than that actually, still coming. I've planted about maybe 15 varieties and the seedlings are growing. I find already this process is much more lucrative, and because I work for myself, I don't need to submit to anyone else, and it's already so much better, and I like it already, so I think that's what I'm going to stick with. And also there's an incentive to working harder, because my profits are directly tied to how hard I work. So, but if I'm working for someone else and getting an hourly wage, and that being next to nothing, it doesn't really matter how hard I work, and it teaches people to just be lazy. I still eventually might pursue welding, but I'll take a different pathway. I have, I think, almost a year down of my apprenticeship that I'll be able to hold as credits for things, but I think I'll take more of an engineering pathway, or at least a highly skilled welding pathway, which is what I wanted to do in the first place. I'll probably take a more independent route and do it on my own instead of trying to do it through the government, which almost everyone does. Anyway, so now I am on my own schedule. I can wake up whenever I want. I can do things that interest me. Can go to the shops whenever I want and get things that I need. I can, yeah, it's just so much nicer. Maybe I'll show you guys around my garden. So it's been a minute or two and I'm just thinking of stuff I want to talk about, and it's come to me, maybe I'll discuss the future of this channel. So there are still some welding topics I'd like to discuss, but I think I'll make more videos about specific topics, like particular kinds of tools and things. It's just, you can only make so many videos about why one particular welding process is preferred to the other. It just gets so boring, and it's such basic things like that once you know them, you just want to move on. It's for instance, if you've watched my video on why I prefer stick welding over MIG welding, if you buy a welder from that point, that information's not useful to you anymore. So making more videos about the same kind of thing, it's just a waste of time. In the pipeline, I'd like to make a video sort of discussing why I believe abrasive saws, cut-off saws, are better in a lot of ways than, what are they called? Cold cut or dry cut saws. And the video will be mostly dispelling the myths that people have about abrasive saws. Not necessarily that cold or dry cut saws are better. Maybe I give off a notion that I'm a lot better at welding than I actually am. Guys, I'm not that great at welding. I know a decent amount of it, but I'm sort of just reteaching other people's information. A lot of the videos I have are from my own experience, and I have spent thousands and thousands of hours in welding shops, but I've spent a lot more time just generally working in sort of making things. So I have a much more of a grasp on the best way to make things, and engineering, designing and stuff like that. By the way, just don't get that confused with knowing how to use technology or whatever. I'm not in CAD and stuff like that. I'm not great at that, but I can build things. So take that for what it's worth. In fact, I think I'm probably a lot more skilled at cooking than I am welding, which is probably surprising to a lot of you. I started this channel as a just my channel, and I could post whatever I wanted on it. In a couple minutes, I threw together that particular video I just mentioned on why I believe stick welding is superior to MIG welding for a lot of people, and it blew up, and people were asking for more content, and that sort of made me that guy, even though at that point I didn't actually know much about welding at all. That was just me reteaching someone else's information. But I still agree with that, and that's why I haven't taken the video down. As for the future of this channel, I want to post other stuff besides just welding, because the topic of welding is, the big picture is very basic. It's just attaching two pieces of metal together. And I don't have the fancy setups to get arc shots or whatever. So I have to make more videos about like fabrication and the way you put stuff together and little tricks. But to be honest, everyone has made videos like that. And how many more people do you need explaining the same things? And also, everyone's opinion's different. I can tell you what's worked best for me, and I know what works best for me, but that might not work best for you. So it leads to these huge arguments in the comments, and people who disagree with me, which is perfectly fine, take personal offense to the things I say, and I end up getting really, really stressed out and spending a lot of time responding to comments. And I kind of snapped, and I made that video called MIG welding is useless, ? Just sort of clearing it up a little bit. Alright, so I finished cutting up the celery, so we have about 2 balls here. And now let's get started on the carrots. Okay, that's a shame. Turns out we only have 1 carrot. This one here, but yeah, that'll be alright. I've got plenty of celery, so that'll, and onions, so that'll probably make up for the lack of carrot. And I'm not going to run to the store and buy some more. Well, I might. I have to leave in about an hour to help a maid out. So maybe I'll just take a walk down to the store and get some carrots. But for now, this will have to do. So I like to take this opportunity to talk about practice. So you see, I can cut things pretty fast with a knife. Now, I wasn't always like that. I started out cutting things like you probably see most people do, where they cut something and then they stop and they move and they're very, very slow, and it takes ages for them to get through anything. Now, that's fine for most people. It works, just like not being great at welding works for most people. But if you want to get better at something, the first thing you need to decide is that you have to get past this obstacle in order to get better, and you need to get better to get the things done that you want to. Alright, it turns out we only have 3 onions too, so I'm gonna have to run to the store and grab some. So, in order to get better at welding, there's no magical trick. I do have a video on how I got better at stick welding in particular, but it all comes down to practice, practice, practice. There's only so much knowledge that will be able to help you, and knowledge definitely does help. I reckon knowing a lot about welding has sped up my learning and knowing what to look for, but the only real way of getting better is hours and hours and hours under the hood. So, just like I said in that video that I just mentioned, make a bunch of work pieces for with the particular kind of joint that you want to get good at welding up. Say it's a fillet joint, or I'd start with making flat runs, at least for stick welding. With MIG, I'd start with fillet joints and burn through a whole spool of wire or a pack of electrodes, and by then you'll be more confident. Maybe take breaks when you get frustrated and tired and your work starts deteriorating. Don't try and push through, because it'll hinder your progress. but understand it will take a long time. Now, a lot of people promote learning how to weld on a particular project. I've seen people weld up like automotive stuff as their first welding project and practice while you're doing that. As cool as I think that is, and I think you will have to work on some actual projects in order to really get good at welding, I'd never ever recommend that. The issue is, on actual projects, if you have a poor weld, it can be life-threatening, particularly with anything automotive. Do not weld up a trailer or fix something on your car, like a bull bar or something like that, if you don't have a decent level of skill. Contrary to what most people seem to think, a terrible weld is not strong. In terms of a number of hours, I'd say it probably takes, about 10 hours under the hood to get decently competent to a point where people won't laugh at you. Which, that is a fair amount of time, and that's thousands of stick electrodes, and it's probably a 5 kilo box of MIG wire. In order to get, and I'm just talking about one particular kind of joint here, I'm not talking about, and in one particular position, I'm not talking about overhead or pipe welding. That's a completely different animal. But if just for one kind of welding process on one joint on one position, I'd say it takes about 100 hours to get proficient at it. With me, it's rough, it's difficult to calculate, but I'd say I've spent about 10 hours stick welding. I've spent several hundred hours MIG welding, and I've probably spent 3 or 4 hours TIG welding. And even with all that time TIG welding, well, it's not really that much, 3 or 4 hours, I still have no idea what I'm doing. I still suck at it. And I'm probably going to need about 100 more hours to get a grip on it. I just got to pet my cat, he's meowing. I'd say TIG welding needs maybe 200 or 300 hours to get decently proficient. MIG will take about 200 and stick will take about 100. It's, in my opinion, learning MIG welding is harder than learning stick welding. And I've made videos on why that is. So check those out if you want to know why. And I started with stick welding, but I've spent the vast majority of my time MIG welding, because that's been a part of my job for the past 3 or so years. And still, after all of that, I'm just okay at welding, and I have very little experience with things like vertical up and overhead, so I am not very good at all at them. I'd also recommend getting a very clear and clean welding hood, and one of decent quality. I've made videos about welding hoods if you want to know which ones I recommend, but it helps a lot having something that you can actually see through, and you'll be amazed at what you can actually see with a pretty decent quality welding hood. Alright, so I just cycled barefoot about 10 kilometers to the store to get some things. So I got carrots, onions, tomato paste, and another bag of onions. So let's get back to chopping. If you think I'm using a lot of ingredients, keep in mind that I'm making probably over 100 portions of food. So that's why I need so much stuff. And in terms of having a lot of vegetables in it compared to what most people would typically do, I think it makes it taste a lot better. And makes it taste more than just cooked tomatoes, which I really like. And it adds a good depth of flavor, especially the celery. Once you caramelize it, adds so much flavor. So I think most people who would make this much sauce would use a food processor to chop up their vegetables, but for one, I like chopping, and for two, it gives me time to talk to you guys. And I enjoy it. I don't know if I mentioned that already. So I'm deliberately cutting these pieces very small because I'm not going to be blending the sauce up after I put all this stuff together. One question I've gotten a couple times is, why do you need to weld things? Why can't you just put bolts in stuff and use bolts and nuts to put stuff together? Now that does work, and that's what a lot of people who don't have welders do, but there are many drawbacks. First one is, what if you are trying to attach thin pieces of metal where a bolt would just be too big to put through, and even if you found a small enough bolt, the sheet metal would bend, so you wouldn't get any holding power. You could put rivets through, but rivets don't have much holding power, so you couldn't really make anything of any substantial strength. So you need a lot of rivets, which, because you're drilling through the material to put the rivets in, you're substantially weakening the structure. Also, even on something that does have substantial mass, to bolt something together, you need to create holes, which are weak points. And that results in you having to make a larger workpiece, which is both more expensive and heavier, just to have the same sort of strength. So if you're doing anything with automotives, weight is a factor, and I think price is always a factor. If you can spend less on steel, that helps. Also, if you make a mistake, which we all do, you can weld two pieces of metal back together and it'll be even stronger than when you started. However, you can't bolt two pieces of metal together and have just a longer piece of metal. Or if you could, it'd be substantially weaker and it'd look terrible. Whereas if you weld two pieces of steel together, you can grind the weld down so that you couldn't tell that the pieces were cut. So bolts are still handy, particularly if you need to take something apart again, or if you need the clamping force of bolts. But I think for most applications, welding is far superior. So that's, and also bolts can be pretty expensive. And you can't really paint bolts to stop them rusting because the paint will jam up the threads. Might be interesting to see what the weight of all this stuff is. I think it's going to fill my stock pot all the way up to the top. Maybe. I have, I don't know, 20 something cans of crushed tomatoes that I'm going to put in here. And the reason why I'm making such a huge batch is because I want to preserve it. So I don't, even though I enjoy cooking, sometimes I don't always have the luxury of making stuff fresh, and some things like pasta sauce, they'll even get better as they sit around for a little while. So I bought, I think, about 100 1 liter preserving jars, and we'll bottle these up. I think it might be a good time to just clear things up about my mental illness. So when I was very young, I got diagnosed with ASD, so autism spectrum disorder, and a diagnosis, just to make it clear, it doesn't change anything. You still had the condition before. A diagnosis maybe just provides a little bit of an answer. And I've been terribly bullied for my entire life, and that's made just everyday life very difficult for me, and that's made school one thing that's very difficult for me. And but the good side of it is that I've always been a very smart and academically gifted student. Now that my intelligence has made a lot of things more difficult. Sometimes you can be so smart that you just can't get past errors. So, for instance, typing up an assignment, you have to make everything factually perfect. So that kind of cuts down on what you can say. I used to see way dumber kids getting A's on their assignments, and I'd read their assignments and it'd just be full of so much misinformation, but the teacher just gobbled it up. And that's just something I could never bring myself to do. So the smart kids don't always get the best grades. And because I was so smart, I've gotten into a lot of trouble throughout my life. If you're someone who thinks that you're dumb or you wish you were a lot smarter, I'd say be careful what you wish for, because my life would be so much easier if I wasn't this smart. But anyway, that's just a gift that God has given me, and He will use it for good. There have been a lot of things that my intelligence has helped me with. Alright, it's been a couple hours, but I am back to it. So I've decided I'm going to actually sell some of this pasta sauce in jars for people. So that's going to change a couple things. I'll talk about that in a second. Alright, I just gave my knife another sharpen. You might be wondering why I'm using a meat cleaver on vegetables, and I have a good reason why. Actually, there's several reasons. First one is that there's more sharpenable area. So I can sharpen this all the way down until here, which that'll be millions of, not millions, a couple thousand times of sharpening this before it gets there. Whereas this, first off, I'd have to grind this down, this point here, but there's far less space to sharpen. Also, this knife is way cheaper. I think it was like under $10, where this one, it came in a set for a couple $100. And another thing is you get a lot more stability, and it's a lot more comfortable, in my opinion, having a little extra space under your hand, and it sort of almost cramps up my hand using such a short knife. So I find it's a lot more comfortable using a cleaver. And the final thing is, for the vegetables that stick on the back, there's more space for them so they don't fall onto the other side of the knife and get in the way of you cutting. So with that said, let's finish going. Alright, now onto the carrots. Now, not really sure how much or what weight of carrots I'm going to put in. I'm probably going to fill up 2 of these bowls, and that'll be good. Now, I am leaving the skins on the carrots. I think most people take them off because the skins are a little bit bitter, but what's wrong with that? People drink beer or dark chocolate because it's bitter. I don't mind a little bit of bitterness, and it's a lot more work. It'll just add some complexity to the flavor with the skins on. So I've been thinking a little bit about the future of this channel. I originally started this channel as my channel, and whatever I wanted to post, that would be what I posted. And if people wanted one particular kind of video then that I didn't want to make, then that was just too bad. But sort of relative success kind of drags you along with it, and things that have lots of popularity, even if it's subconscious, you make more of those things. So ever since my one video on welding exploded, my channel got pulled into that direction. Even though I wanted to make videos about other things, I sort of got caught in the trap of not being able to, because this is now a welding channel. So channels that do have one particular focus tend to accumulate a lot more views and money and subscribers, because people subscribe for one particular type of content, and that's what you're known for. I think it's a lot more rare to see a more multi-branched YouTube channel with the same sort of popularity. You can see that if you look even on my channel page, that this does look like a welding channel. My about section is about welding. The banner on my channel is about welding, and I pretty much have no other videos except welding. The welding videos. I have hundreds of videos on this channel, but maybe only 50 of them are public. The videos on other things I took down because I wanted to make this a welding channel. But now that I'm sort of branching out into other things, I don't know if I can keep a welding channel up. So I think I'm going to reformat my channel, and yeah, so I won't get nearly as popular, but at least I'll enjoy making videos. I do have a lot more aspects to myself than just enjoying welding, and things that I love to make videos about. For instance, mental illness or mental health, and different laws, and gardening, and building things, and educational videos that aren't really about welding, and cooking, and documenting my new business, which will be selling plants. Informative videos by far are the most stressful kind of video for me to film anyway, because in order to not have a bunch of jump cuts, you have to nail the line, and that can take as many as 50 takes. I know it sounds ridiculous for a channel with so few views, but yeah, sometimes I spend half an hour trying to get a single take, just trying to get my words right. So that's why videos about doing things are far easier to make and film, and take far less time, because I don't have to fumble with my lines. But one reason why I don't really have any videos about making things is because to get my lines right, it takes so many takes that it's a huge mission to try and get anything done while filming it. Also, this camera, its battery only lasts maybe an hour, so it's a big struggle focusing on what I'm doing if I have to constantly worry about the camera battery. So I'd way prefer making videos about, say for instance my garden, showing what I've done, and not really have much footage about, or showing me in the process of doing it. I can do those things, just it couldn't be for everything, because like I said, it's a huge stress, and it can make me dread filming videos. It might not seem like it, but these videos actually take a big effort to make. At least the ones I edit. This one's probably not going to take that much effort. That's one reason why I haven't posted a lot in the past couple months, even though I've had a lot of time. It's just because making videos is a really, really stressful job. And this, by the way, I don't mean to sound like I deserve anything, because I don't. It's my choice to put videos on this platform, but I spend a lot of time making videos, and I don't get any financial gain out of it, at least not for the moment. So it can seem sometimes like a waste of time making videos, especially now that I've started not really appreciating attention. Back a couple of years ago, I loved when people would see what I would be doing, and that was just the way I was. I wanted fame and popularity, even if I didn't get any money for it. But now I'm completely the opposite. I can't stand when people know me. I try and keep my things private. Thought this would be a good time to talk about the name of my channel, Mikl the Pikl. So ever since I started this YouTube channel, that was the name. Briefly, I got into making videos, like political videos, like trying to bash feminism. And I called myself The Last Alpha, which is a pretty cringy name. So if you see in some of my videos that I've called myself The Last Alpha, that's why. But it was maybe my name for about a year, and then I changed my name to Mikl the Pikl / The Last Alpha for maybe another year, and then finally I just switched it back to Mikl the Pikl. So you might be wondering, where did Mikl the Pikl, the name, come from? I don't really like sharing my legal name on YouTube. Maybe I'm just an idiot and it'd be completely fine, but I don't like my legal name. I prefer going by my middle name or second name, which is Mikl. So if someone asks what my name is, I say Mikl Lennox, unless it's someone who already knows me. And from Mikl came Mikl, and that turned into Mikl the Pikl. So there's not really much thought behind it, but there you go, there's the explanation. I plan in the next little while changing my legal name to Mikl Lennox, but for the moment it's nice just not sharing my legal name anywhere, just because that can cause problems. I've taken this whole name bonanza so far that I've taken videos down when I've mentioned my legal name, because it matters that much to me that people don't know my legal name. So I think if I had a choice, right now I'd go with Lennox, my last name, because that would be easier for people to understand. Another thing I don't like about I was almost about to mention it there, but my legal name it's one syllable, so it sounds a lot like someone just shouting out something, or like a bang or something like that. So often I hear someone call my name, but they didn't actually, and that can be very annoying. So I thought I'd just answer why I'm not using something like a food processor or a grater to cut these carrots up. I'll show you why. So I do have a food processor, but it requires that I cut the carrots into smaller pieces to put in, so they don't just spin around and actually get chopped up. So I need to cut them anyway to put them in. Also, the actual capacity in the food processor is only a couple carrots, so it'd take a bunch of times loading it up and blending it up for me to get the amount of carrot that I need. And also it's loud, and it's another thing I have to clean. Whereas I'm just gonna chop my vegetables up, I can get it done just as fast, and it's more fun, no noise, don't have to clean it. A food processor can also leave some pieces of uneven size, so very small pieces and then big long strains, which can be very unpleasant in something like a sauce. Another option is grating carrots. So for someone who isn't very skilled with a knife, a lot of people do this, and it's handy when people have a lot of stuff to cut up, and especially if you are cutting onion, carrot and celery. But I see people using celery and onions on graters, but it's never worked for me. Onion, the layers just get ripped apart and it doesn't grate properly, and it just turns to a mush. Also, celery hasn't ever worked for me. And the strains you get from using a grater with a carrot mean that you have to cut the carrot into multiple pieces and run it through the grater like that, and that is very awkward and uncomfortable. So, and that involves you cutting them anyway, so why don't I just cut it? I'm gonna need very small pieces because I don't want these to be noticeable as vegetables in the final product. I want the flavor and the thickening of these, but I don't want someone to be like, be able to tell, oh, that's carrot, that's celery, that's whatever. Because this is a sauce, it's not a soup. So, and I'm not blending this after, so I have to make the pieces pretty small. If you're trying to follow what I'm doing, I don't use a recipe. I try and build everything around fixed quantities. So for instance, we always have carrots and onions. So celery is my fixed quantity. So if I make sauce, I make it around a whole head of celery. And then I don't really, in fact, I don't measure anything. I sort of do it by eye. And that seemed to work out for me. So can't really help you out there. Maybe just follow someone's recipe online. I started cooking when I was pretty young. I'm not really sure when I started. I think my first thing that I cooked was probably a very basic dish, like, not dish, but thing like rice or something in the microwave. My mom is not a great cook and she knows that, so it won't hurt her feelings saying that, but eventually I got fed up with eating the food that she made, and I started cooking all my meals for myself. But even since I was pretty young, I was like packing my own lunchbox and stuff like that, so none of this is new to me. But in the past couple of years, I've really looked at cooking things that really taste good, and occasionally I cook for my family and they seem to enjoy it. So yeah, that's how I got into cooking. Before anyone asks, I am not going to pursue like chefing or something like that. Chefs don't get paid much. It's a very stressful environment. Just in regards to the comment I made about peeling carrots, it's up to you whether you want to peel them. I'd say if you're making only a couple portions of sauce, then you should take the time to peel them. But there's a couple reasons why I don't. For one, it only makes a pretty small or subtle difference. And for two, at this sort of scale, I'm both wasting carrot, shaving it, and it takes a lot of time, and that both wastes my time and it makes the end product cost more. And both of those are not things I'm after. And really isn't a big deal having the carrot skins on. This isn't a dish with a huge percentage carrot. It's mostly going to be tomatoes, so the little bit of bitter flavor will get drowned out. So it's not a big deal. It's only been in the past couple months that I've really been sort of getting a life, to put it frankly. I used to sort of just spend my time watching YouTube videos and maybe cooking occasionally, but that was it. But in the past couple months I picked up gardening, so I'd like to try and be almost completely self-sufficient. I think that'd be awesome. And just eating what I can grow and forage and catch for a certain amount of time. I'm trying to just live off the grid and see if it's even possible. I think that's a sort of part of me I've never really explored, but I've always been craving. Because depriving yourself of things that are just so convenient and easy is when you start appreciating and enjoying things. And it's good that I have more time now. I'm not employed full-time. I work for myself, so I can choose whatever hours I want. So now to put all these scraps in the compost bin. Gotta be careful to not accidentally put my chopped food in there. It wouldn't be the first time. So it just crossed my mind. A question I get all the time is where I'm from, because I do have a little bit of an accent. This is a very tough question for me to answer because my parents are both South African. They met in South Africa and only about 15 years ago moved here. They moved to New South Wales in Australia. And I was born here not too long after that, so I wasn't born in South Africa. So if that makes me Australian, that's up to you. But I do more closely agree with the statement that I'm South African than I'm Australian. I do have an Australian passport, but I don't think that really says a lot. I've only visited South Africa, I think, once or twice, and that was when I was very, very young, so I don't remember a lot from it. So I really miss South Africa, but and my parents won't go over because of the danger, and I do agree it's not safe there, but it has deprived me of a lot of sort of my heritage, and my whole extended family lives over there, so I've never really known them. And say on things like Grandparents' Day or whatever it's called, yeah, I didn't have any grandparents like at school or anything like that. In recent times, my extended family has sort of tried to reconnect, and it really upsets me when they act like they know me, even though we've never talked before. I wouldn't even recognize them. So I don't consider them my family at all. What's funny is I actually have a bit of an American accent, and that's just from watching too many YouTube videos. So I don't have an Australian accent at all. Don't have any heritage over here. I have a South African and American accent, but I am South African Australian, first generation. So if you wanted to do this at home, which I don't think really anyone would, I'd say use about 2 or 3 stalks of celery. I'd use 1 onion and then 2 carrots, and that should be good. And you can just adjust the rest of the recipe according to that. Okay, so the base of my recipe will be all the same brand of crushed tomatoes. So I'm not sponsored by these people at all, but these are finely chopped tomatoes. If you're in the US, you can use crushed tomatoes, but one thing you need to make sure of is get a high quality can, preferably San Marzano tomatoes, and spend a decent amount of money on them. Most of the sauce is tomato, so you want to splurge. So now it's time to get started with the actual cooking. So I've got this big stock pot on my largest burner, and I'm going to use olive oil to saute the carrots, onions, and celery. I typically would use butter, but because I'm selling this, there might be a vegan who buys it, so I'm going to try and keep this vegan. It won't really affect much. I'm not vegan, just putting that out there. So you can either saute all of these vegetables at the same time, or you can saute the onions separately. Sauteing the onions separately will allow you to get them all caramelized, and really develop the flavor on them. The carrots need a lot of cooking to break them down, but they don't really need to be caramelized. But I'm choosing to saute them all together because it's not that important to me. I've decided not to add the jalapenos to this because I am selling it, and not everyone likes spice, so I might just add it to my portions and it'll be alright. So this will probably need even like half an hour to cook down. I'll just keep stirring it. There's so much water in the pot that it's very difficult for this stuff to burn. It just takes a long time to cook. If you put the tomatoes in now, the things like the carrots will take forever to get soft. They really need dry heat for them to soften. So over the next maybe half an hour or so, I'll just keep stirring this up, and then it's time to add the tomato products. You can add salt to this now, but if I just add the salt at the end, then I can just add the exact amount I want, and there's no risk of over or under salting this. So as those are cooking down, I'm just gonna talk for a minute about adding alcohol. So I'm gonna pour in this whole bottle of white wine, and maybe about half this bottle of vodka. I'm gonna add about half a shot per one of these cans, so I'll have to work out how much that is. So if you're worrying that I'm gonna make this all boozy and it's gonna get everyone drunk, this is gonna cook down for hours, so most of the alcohol will evaporate off. And even so, even if all the alcohol stayed in it, you'd have to eat so much of it to get any sort of effect that it's not really a big deal. If you want to learn more about adding white wine to stuff, check this video out. I've decided I'm going to leave all the things that I mentioned down in the description, so just check there. If you're making this as a product to sell, in the US you're lucky because alcohol of any kind is really cheap, whereas here even the cheapest white wine is like $12 or $13, and this bottle of 1 liter of vodka costs $60, where I'm pretty sure it costs like $13 to $15 in the US. So whatever, it's gonna add quite a bit of money to the cost, but if you really think about it, it's only like less than $1 per portion anyway, and it makes it taste a lot better. So there's a couple reasons why I'm frying everything at the moment instead of adding the tomatoes now and getting a head start on the cooking. First one is if you add any sort of liquid to this, it isn't going to brown the vegetables. They're just going to stay cooked and taste exactly the same they would raw. They aren't going to develop any flavor. And as you know from eating a steak or anything like that, the brown, it's called the Maillard reaction, tastes amazing on the outside of the steak. If I don't let these cook down, it'll taste more like soup, and it won't really have the same depth of flavor as letting this fry down. And also in tomato sauce, which is thicker than water, it can be very difficult to soften the vegetables. The onions would probably be okay, but the carrots can stay tough for a long time, and that can cause problems. You want these vegetables to be absolutely falling apart. So just giving this a little mix, and then I'll let it sit for another 5 minutes or so. So being self-sufficient involves preserving things so that you have food all year round. So recently I bought a dehydrator, and I've been dehydrating a lot of stuff. I've also been making a lot of pickles, or pickled vegetables of any kind. So for instance, I have these dried apples, or dehydrated apples. I make this sweet coleslaw, like cabbage concoction. It's amazing. I have dried milk. These are these very tart grapes that someone sent me, or someone gave me actually, and I took the seeds out and I dehydrated them, and they are very, very sour, but they're right to eat. I have pickled bell peppers. I've got a bunch of dried chilies or peppers. I've got monk fruit sweetener, which is, I think, just stevia. I don't really like adding sugar to stuff, just for the calories. I've got pickled cucumbers, a bunch of those. I made a homemade sugar-free ketchup. A lot fewer calories than store-bought stuff. And this is sort of a dessert kind of thing. I preserved these apples, I think they're apples anyway, in a sucrose syrup, so they're like candy now. More dried red chilies. I've got dried limes, dried mushrooms, and more dried whole cucumbers. These are the jars I'm going to be putting the sauce in. So I ordered these from Kmart, which is like Walmart's, but in Australia. I'm not sure if you guys have Kmart over there. And these were, I think, $5 for 3 of them. These are preserving jars, so they're something like $1.60 each. And that's an amazing deal. So I believe I ordered 45 of them. These aren't to be confused with mason jars, which have a separate lid and the screw top on them. For some reason, mason jars are very hard to find and very expensive where I am. Not really sure, maybe I'm just not looking in the right places, but these are specifically designed for preserving stuff, so I just thought I'd take them. So it's maybe been 5 or 10 minutes now, and this is nowhere near cooked yet. When it's at this stage, when you've just added it, I could leave this for 10 or 15 minutes and it wouldn't burn. But the further along it goes, the faster it'll burn because there's less water to pull out heat from it. So just be cautious of that. Come back every maybe 5 minutes and give this a big stir. And the longer it cooks, the more frequently you'll have to stir. Alright, as that's frying, I'll answer a couple questions that I keep getting. So people want to know about my schooling history. So I've been to 3 schools. I would like to mention what they are, but I don't think I will, I don't really want to get sued. Anyway, I went to one particular Christian school for maybe about 10 or 11 years. So I went up until my first week of year 7. I had a sort of fallout that happened. I got blamed and for something I didn't do, and I just decided, you know what, I'll leave and moved to a new school. And it was in a gifted kids program, and I was super excited when I was there. because I was finally, there's something that'll challenge me and maybe I won't get in trouble as much. I used to get in trouble all the time at my first school, but coming like a week after all the introduction and stuff to the new high school system, I had no idea what I was doing, so it took a long time to sort of get my feet on the ropes. I went there for a couple of years and I became a very, very popular student. I probably was the most popular student in the school and everyone knew me, and still to this day I get people just on the street like saying hi to me and I'm like, I have no idea who you are. Because there have been plenty of times when I've given speeches in front of the whole school. So yeah, anyway, I went there from grade 7 to grade 9, and then I moved to a trade college, and it was absolutely terrible. It was nothing like a trade college. It was just this stupid, like, it was like grade 5 work in grade 10, and I got so bored there. They didn't teach you how to do anything. They just wasted your time, and they sent you to work experience at places that weren't accepting apprenticeships, so they'd just be wasting your time. Anyway, I was going to go back in grade 11, but I had gotten in trouble a lot at the school. In fact, I got a non-compliance, and if you get 2 of those, you get kicked out. So in what should have been my grade 11, I just decided to end my schooling, and I started my apprenticeship and my certificate 3 in engineering training. And now I'd be in grade 12 now, but yeah, anyway. Working before welding. So people want to know why I seem to know what I'm doing like around a shop, even though it's only been a couple of years. So ever since I was a really little kid, I've been helping my dad out with things around the house. We live on a 1-acre property, so there's always stuff that needs to be repaired and built and whatever. So since I was very, very young, I've been handling tools, using things like hand saws at like age 4. Yeah, I think if you have kids, teach them how to use tools. I still meet kids who don't know how to use a screwdriver, and it just amazes me. That's abuse to your child if you don't teach them the basic things. When I think I was maybe like 12 or something, I started woodworking, and I bought a bunch of woodworking tools. I'm not sure if I've taken them down, but I made some videos about that. But eventually I thought welding was cool. I picked up a welder, and I've been putting all my woodworking stuff away since then because I liked welding more. So people ask about my YouTube channel and stuff like that. So this is not my first YouTube channel. I've been on YouTube since I think 2015. So what's that, 7 years now? I had just this stupid channel where we'd post random stuff. Not going to say the name of it. I later created a channel. It was a chemistry channel and a science channel, but since then I've taken all the videos off it, and I deleted them by accident, and there were some very, very popular videos on there. So that's kind of unfortunate, but then a couple of years ago I started this channel, and I haven't made a new one since, and I don't plan on doing it because this channel's not supposed to be, or when I created this, what I had in mind was it wasn't wrapped around a particular thing. It was just about me and the things I like. Alright. My age, so I am 17. I only turned 17 a couple weeks ago or something like that. But I am 6'4", and I'm 6'5" in boots. And when I have my facial hair growing and stuff like that, I tend to look a lot older. And I think my most popular video I was 15 in. So yeah, I look a lot older than I actually am. But just because I'm young doesn't mean I don't know what I'm doing. Weight loss. So I've gotten a lot of comments that I seem to have lost weight, and that is correct. I'll just tell you my full story. So maybe about 5 years ago now, I was very underweight and I was very skinny, and I was maybe about 6 feet tall, and I was like 57 kilograms or something like that. So my BMI was very low. I was underweight, and you could see I was all like shriveled up. The reason being is my family has bullied me a lot of my life, and they kept telling me that I was fat, and they even put me on drugs to suppress my appetite so I'd eat less, and that's the result. That's what happens. But I finally realized that I needed to gain some weight, and I put on a lot of weight. I just I was lifting all the time, and I put on about 60 kilograms, so I doubled my weight. The last 20 kilos maybe was just comfort eating and binge eating and depression. But I think at the start of at the start of last year, I decided I needed to lose weight. I was 118 kilograms, I'm pretty sure, and I got down to 81 kilograms. So that's almost 40 kilograms, I think. One thing not on my YouTube channel, but I get a lot of comments on in real life or face to face, is my hair. So I do have pretty damn long hair. I didn't always have long hair. In, I think, grade 9, so 2019, my school wouldn't allow you to, for your hair to touch your collar. So all the boys had to have short hair. So what I did is I grew it on the top and shaved the sides, so I had this thing coming down like that. I might put a photo up here. But at when was it? I think it was at the end of last year, I decided just to not cut my hair and grow it, because in grade 10, my school allowed long hair, so I'm like, why don't I just not cut it? And yeah, I really like it. A lot of girls comment on it. So if you want to pick up some chicks, maybe try some long hair. So next thing is my faith, my Christianity. So yes, I am a Christian. I believe in God. I've believed in God since I was a kid, because both my parents are Christians or believe in God, but I don't think I really was a Christian until recently. You might have noticed a sort of change in how my videos are since then. I don't really think I was living out what God intended, and started reading my Bible. And for all the people who just think that's a bunch of nonsense, that God made everything, looking at it from an objective point of view, I believe God does exist, because there's a number of reasons. The case I was thinking about is, how would any of this get here? And yeah, maybe I'll talk about it a bit more another day. But even if you are an atheist, I still think what God has said in order of how to act is the best way to do things. I've struggled with some serious mental health issues for my entire life, and God's the only thing that's carried me through. So I don't want to Bible bash you, but if you want to come along on the ride, I can tell you all about them. Realized I forgot an ingredient, garlic. So this sauce will not taste right without garlic. I just buy it pre-peeled in these containers and throw it in the freezer, and it doesn't go bad. So because this will cook down a lot, it doesn't really matter the shape, but I'll cut the pieces pretty small. Most of the pungency of the garlic will disappear after cooking this for multiple hours. So if you want to use a lot of garlic, that's completely fine. It won't blow your head off with the super pungent taste of garlic. And use probably about a whole head worth of garlic. As I'm cutting up this garlic, I thought I'd maybe answer a question or whatever, just about my mental illness. So when I say I'm mentally ill, that doesn't mean I'm insane or anything like that. I am sane. It's sort of like an illness, but just in your mind. So the reason why I mention it is because it might not be visible, so things might not make sense to a lot of you. So I mentioned a couple minutes ago that I am autistic, but I think I got cut off when I started talking about me having ADHD. So I'm sure you guys know what ADHD is. So many people claim they have ADHD and don't. It's pretty frustrating, because it makes it sort of seem like a joke when someone actually has ADHD, and ADHD can be a crippling disease, or at least condition. And I'm not trying to say there's anything wrong with you if you have ADHD. I have ADHD, but it can make everyday life very, very difficult. So I am diagnosed, and I do have severe ADHD. It can be very difficult just functioning. But I maybe about a year ago, I started on medication for my ADHD. I got put on Ritalin. That did help, but it came with a lot of side effects, and yeah, I'm not a big fan of it. So I went on and off of that for about a year, but recently I've been put on dexamphetamine, which is it's similar to Adderall, which we don't have in Australia, and I'm responding much better to that. So I think that's what we're going to do from now on. In addition to having autism and ADHD, which are kind of interlinked, but they are separate conditions, so that's why I mention them, is I have anxiety and depression. I've had anxiety my whole life, and it's only been in the past couple of years that I actually knew what it was. True anxiety is crippling. Just talking to anyone, it's not really possible, and I couldn't leave the house, and I bet it was hard on my parents too, because everything would stress me out, and it's very evident if you're an autistic child and you get autism anxiety, that things as simple as having the wrong fork or a spoon or something can give you an anxiety attack. So a lot of people laugh and think that's just being such a terrible kid, but there might be something behind it which you have to understand. Now, on my depression, and by the way, depression is different from just sadness. I've had depression. My depression popped out later, so probably when I was around 11 or 12 or so, it popped up, and it stayed with me for the past couple of years. Ever since I was maybe 11 or 12, there have been periods in my life when, for months or years, every day I contemplate suicide, and I just constantly asked myself that, and I just felt like there was no will to live. But I think in 2018 it got very, very bad, and I made a video about it, but I've since taken it down. Maybe I'll post it up again. But in 2019 it got absolutely crippling. I had a girl break up with me, and that completely threw me off the rails. I didn't leave my room for probably a month, and I was so depressed. I wouldn't leave my bed at all, and I don't think I've ever been that sad. Past couple of years, it's sort of been manageable, but in the past couple of months, it's popped up, and I have been struggling with depression for past couple months, and that's one of the reasons why I haven't been uploading. But last year I was put on Lexapro, which is an anxiety and depression medication, and it's helped both drastically. It doesn't even get me close to 100%, but I can do a lot of things that I've never been able to, which is just amazing. I also have PTSD, but I don't really feel like going into detail about that. Alright, so it's time for the garlic to go in. If we had added this at the start, there's a risk of it burning, and these pieces are very finely chopped, so they don't need a lot of cooking. Most of the cooking will be done in the sauce. Alright, so it's been about half an hour of this sauteing, and you see that stuff at the bottom of the pot? That is called fond. It's all the caramelized flavors from these vegetables. So as this is going, you'll need to scrape that stuff off of the bottom or it'll burn. And when you go and leave this pot unattended, make sure that you don't leave any gaps where you've spread this out, because that fond will burn and ruin the sauce. It looks kind of silly, but I'm putting on a glove to stir this up because it is getting pretty toasty. So I'm going to wait as long as I can before adding any of the liquid ingredients, just to get as much caramelization on these as I can. and then I'll add the tomato paste, let that saute for a little bit, and then we'll add the liquid ingredients. So I've started to be able to smell that a couple burn flavors, so I think this is almost ready to add our tomato paste. Alright, so I'm going to put in this whole jar. Tomato paste is very concentrated, so I just put in maybe a tablespoon, but keep in mind I'm making a lot of portions of food, so I'll need a lot of tomato paste. Once this is in, we'll give it a fry just like the vegetables. The reason why we didn't add this at the start, because even though it needs to get fried anyway, is because it would prevent the outsides of the vegetables from caramelizing, because the only thing that would be touching the pan would be the tomato paste. So I'm going to keep a close eye on this and let it fry for 1 or 2 more minutes. It's time to add some liquid. So in goes the white wine. If I were just cooking for myself, I'd use probably just a splash, but this isn't just for myself. So now goes in some vodka. So I'm going to use about half a shot or 15 milliliters per every can of crushed tomatoes. So in my case, that's about 350 milliliters. Yep. In that goes. My light has died. So these cans do have a pull tab on them to help you get the lid off, but I always use a can opener on them anyway, because every time I've opened a can of tomatoes, half of it ends up on the ceiling and the walls. So now it's time to add our tomatoes. So I'm going with, I think, 15 of these mini cans and 4 of the double-sized cans. So I should end up with the equivalent of 23 of these cans, these small ones. So, and for the record, it doesn't matter which liquid you add first, whether it's the wine, vodka, or tomatoes. It's just I needed to add some liquid to the pan, otherwise it would burn, and I didn't have the cans opened yet. The reason why we cook the tomato paste, give it a little fry, is to do 2 things. First is to get a bit of caramelization on it, which will enhance the flavor. And secondly, it gets rid of the disgusting tomato paste flavor. I don't know if you've ever tried to make pizza at home as a kid and use tomato paste instead of tomato sauce. That's sort of what the sauce will taste like if you don't pre-cook the tomato paste. I'm just going to let this simmer on high heat for several hours. There's no salt in the pot yet. I'll add that later. It is crucial that you do not salt this now, because if you salt it and then it boils down and concentrates, it can end up too salty, so you want to be careful of that. I'm going to let this boil down and then salt to taste at the end. So with this pasta sauce taking a couple more hours to cook, I thought I'd take a second and talk about these tomatoes. So this is the brand I use. It's Palmer finely chopped tomatoes. You want to make sure to spend a decent amount of money on your tomatoes. Out of anything in pasta sauce, the thing that matters the most to be high quality is the tomato sauce. A lot of different vegetables and flavorings and stuff can taste pretty good when inexpensive and low quality, but tomatoes are a big exception. They just won't taste right at all unless you spend a decent amount of money on Italian canned tomatoes. Another thing I make sure to look at is either crushed or finely chopped tomatoes. You can use diced tomatoes, I've done that before. The problem is that you have to either blend them up before or after making the sauce, and that's a huge pain. Probably the best thing you can use are whole canned tomatoes. You just reach and pick them out, and then you blend them up and put them into your pot. Problem with that is you're throwing away all of the canning liquid, which is about half of the volume of the can, and it costs about the same. So it's a big throwaway of money and for a marginal benefit. So I just use this finely chopped tomatoes and call it a day. It's not as important for the tomato paste to be high quality. This is just a store brand. The reason why we add the tomato paste is because the tomato sauce won't taste tomatoey enough. It'll taste more like vegetable soup if we don't add this. Tomato paste is a very, very, very concentrated form of tomato. It's been tomato, the same stuff that comes in the can, but it's been condensed down. Problem is, if you add too much or you don't cook it enough, it can taste really bad. Just make sure you don't burn it, otherwise it'll taste awful. If you're making this at home, it won't take nearly as long as what I'm doing. This will take a couple hours to simmer because there's so much water there and the burner can only get so big. If I were doing this at home and needed to get this done in a hurry, just got to turn the heat down or it'll splash me. What I'd do is I'd simmer it in a pan instead of a pot, and that will increase the evaporation and will make it reduce a lot faster. Another thing you can do is use one of your larger burners on your stove. You can turn the heat further up if you want to high and do it on high heat the whole way. It's just you have to make sure you stir it constantly, otherwise it'll burn, but it will work. So it's been about an hour since the last clip. You can see it's dark outside, and I thought now is the time to add herbs. So my herbs of choice are basil and oregano. Problem is, you can't just cut up basil and put it in the sauce. If you do that, it won't taste like anything. That's because the heat from the sauce will destroy the flavor compounds and it'll just taste like bitter cardboard. Oregano can handle the heat a lot better, but basil is very sensitive, so I'm gonna add it once the sauce is cooled down. But if I just chop these up and I put them in the sauce once it's cool, they will turn brown. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna blanch these, which is putting them in boiling water for about 30 seconds to a minute, and that'll set the color green. By the way, this is totally unnecessary. It's just something that I'm choosing to do. It should be quite a bit easier getting the oregano off of the stem before it's cooked rather than after. I don't have to deal with these while they're boiling hot. In all honesty, you can just use dried oregano, but dried basil is, I'm not even sure if you can find it because it tastes like dirt. I put a splatter guard on top of this pot just to try and help reduce the splashing, both so I don't burn myself and because it wastes the sauce and makes a mess. Even though I've got this on low heat, it is still splashing, and the thicker this sauce gets, the worse the splashing will get. And also I'm wearing a glove just so the splashing doesn't scald me. Make sure you give this a mix about every 10 minutes and scrape the stuff off the bottom. Because this is a suspension of solid vegetable parts in the water, the solids settle down to the bottom and can burn. So it's important to scrape them off the bottom and give it a good stir about every 10 minutes. If you're doing this in a much smaller pot, you'll have to stir it more frequently. And it looks like my blanching water is ready. I've just got a bowl of ice water here, and I'm going to use that to put the herbs in after I've blanched them. Alright, in it goes. And this only needs about 30 seconds. Alright, put them in a strainer and into some ice water. Alright, I've taken the herbs out of the ice. Now just to give them a little chop. I want to cut these into very small pieces in order to get a decent amount in each jar, because if it's all clumped together, it won't spread out into the sauce. So when I talk about videos being stressful, here's what I mean. So I'm just about to start editing this video, even though it's not finished yet, and I have no idea where my little dongle that connects to this USB-C port on my laptop is. So I'm gonna have to hunt down this entire house for this little white dongle. All right, I found it. There we go. Just out in a cupboard somewhere. So, if you're wondering why I don't sound too enthusiastic, or maybe I sound a little weird, it's because I started filming this video at about 11 a.m. and it's currently 7:38 p.m. So I've been filming this video for a very long time. It might seem like such a simple thing, but anything you film takes a very long time, and this is one reason why I struggle so much producing videos, it's because they take a lot of time, even if they aren't a particularly in-depth video. I saw someone planting bean plants in bean cans, so I think it'd be cool to plant tomato plants in tomato cans. Alright, this has been simmering for about 3 hours now. I've just covered it with this splatter guard. Do not put a lid on top of this or it won't evaporate. The water will just condense on the top and fall back in, and you won't be getting anywhere. Even if you're a clean freak, I'd urge you to wipe everything down after you've taken this off the stove, because this will continue splashing throughout the entire process of cooking. So if you wipe it down, you're gonna have to wipe it down again later, so why not just wipe it down once? With that said, I think it's time to season. So you want to pull this off the heat a little bit before its final, or the final thickness that you want it, because the pectins in the sauce will continue to thicken it. So this is right about perfect. Now, we haven't added any salt yet, so it's time to do that now. Alright, I've just taken this off the heat. I've just put it here to make it easier to film, but if I weren't filming this, I'd just leave it on the stove. So it's time to season this. So to get this to the point that we want it, we can adjust 3 things. The salinity, or by adding salt. We can add acid to change the acidity, and we can adjust the sweetness. So some weird chemistry is going on here. So if we season with salt first and then add acid, it's actually not going to taste salty enough, because adding acid to a dish with salt in it makes it taste less salty. And adding any sort of sweetness to something will reduce how salty it is. So we'll have to sort of go back and forth a couple times just to make it spot on. I'm happy with how the basic flavor of this is, but it's missing a couple things like garlic and some more herbs. So I've actually spent about the past hour taste testing and adjusting this sauce here. It needed a lot more sugar, salt, and plenty more vinegar. Once I had those down, it needed way more basil, oregano, and garlic. But now it is just perfect. So it's time to clean it up. Alright, so after many hours of work, I am left with 10 of these jars of this beautiful pasta sauce. If you enjoyed watching, please leave a like on this video. If you want to see anything else, please leave a comment. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.